In today's version of the Business Alchemist podcast, I find myself yet again talking about AI. But in this show today, I'm so pleased that we have someone who has been in the AI game for almost 35 years. And we're going to be asking, is AI real, or is it hype, or is there something in between that we can really take and use for the betterment of business and humanity? So I'd like to welcome Nick Sales. Nick, welcome to the Business Alchemist podcast.
Thank you very much, Phil. Great to be with you.
Excellent. So I thought we would maybe kick off, Nick, with that kind of mini introduction that I've given, which is I find myself being so seduced and so pulled in to the AI conversation that I have to admit that I actually dropped a post this morning all about AI, and I used the backdrop of the cult movie Ex Machina, that I have to admit I was seduced by and almost terrified by. But that brings me to the question for you, Nick, because I know that you have been in this game for a long time, but we'll come to that in a minute. What do you see? What do you think's happening in the world of AI? Is it real? Clearly it's real because there's a lot of money out there and there's a lot of people using AI. But what's your background analysis of what's happening in the world of AI and business today?
It's actually a really important question, Phil, because I think a lot of businesses' current investments and quite a lot of people's futures depend on what's done with AI. And as you say, it is real. But in the background, how much of the reality is being inflated and twisted to serve the needs of the people standing to make the most money out of it? So I've got mixed feelings. I've got mixed feelings because, as you say, I've been in the AI game for a long time. I've formally started working with it in 1990, which is amazing. Now, looking back at it, that's at the age of 2, obviously, I started getting into AI. Yes. Not true, obviously. But it was my first love. It was my intended career. And I came straight out of university, got into working on AI, and I saw a huge, bright future for it. As it turned out, the course of history went a different way for AI for various reasons. But from about 2015, we've been on this new wave of AI for various reasons. The two main ones are actually availability of cloud, huge availability of effectively unbounded computing and data and networking resources, and some brilliant advances in neural network architectures that led to a couple of Nobel Prizes last year for Jeff Hinton and John Hopfield, but also have led, much more important for most people, to LLMs today and other things like the GANs that we use for image and video generation. But LLMs especially are the hottest topic at the moment, aren't they? ChatGPT, Claude, and many others, DeepSeek. And how I feel about them, which was kind of what you actually asked. As I say, mixed feelings. On the one hand, so exciting. What we've got. I'll say it in plain speak, and I'll say it how I think about it. What we've got is essentially natural language, proper natural language processing, amazingly sophisticated and convincing natural language processing being used all over the place for all kinds of language applications. And for me, actually, what that is, by the way, a very, very sophisticated statistical model of language with a Nobel Prize winning way of capturing all the context. So you don't have to have a certain amount of memory used for processing sentences of different lengths. But leaving aside the technical language, we've also got we've also got amazing and unbelievable claims being made about LLMs and what they'll do. And actually, while they are amazing, the unbelievable is in the real true sense of unbelievable. They can't be believed because people keep making claims like this category of jobs is going, or that category of jobs is going, or I saw an article in The Guardian a few days ago. Admittedly, it was critical of the proposition, but it did say all jobs are going. Silicon Valley wants to automate away all jobs. Um, and in many ways, I hope this is obviously untrue, but it's very scary and it's having lots of negative effects. It's having bad effects on, I don't know about you psychologically, but certainly me, even I worry about it occasionally. But it's also having effects on business. There are lots of rushed investments, and it's in many cases, a poor investment decision, or at least an unmotivated investment decision. So overall, there's a lot of things going on. I suppose the takeaway from me is, though, on the one hand, an amazing advance in AI. Many of the things I always dreamed of, because my research work was, it turned out to be in the basics of what LLMs have actually become. And on the other hand, lots of things that I'm really not enjoying and I'm very concerned about broadly in the whole of society.
Okay. So let's try and unpack that a little bit. Because like you, I'll be honest with you, about 2 years ago when ChatGPT came out, I remember being really torn because at the time I was getting into writing in quite a big way on LinkedIn. I'd already written my own book, so I was quite pleased with myself that I'd started to write. And then I got into a regular pattern of writing on LinkedIn. And then out came ChatGPT, and I thought, oh my God, so what's the point in me learning to write if I can just put a prompt into ChatGPT and out comes a almost perfect prompt? So I'll be honest, it actually put me off writing for quite a few months. I then came back and I thought, no, I'll persevere. And I started to interact with ChatGPT, and I realized that I could work quite well hand in hand with the LLMs, and I realized that the output from the ChatGPTs were not perfect and didn't have often my essence. So I got back into writing again, and I started to have ChatGPT as my sidekick. But obviously, it's developing faster and faster. And then just recently, I came across your posts because I started seeing posts from a chap called Stephen Klein. And Stephen Klein gave me hope, to be honest, because for the first time, I heard someone starting to question the hype cycle. And he was positioning and talking about a whole range of research posts, research surveys that were actually going against the mainstream narrative. And he was also explaining that the people who were making the real big money were the consultancies. So you've just picked up on the fact that there are businesses that are making decisions right now and you haven't said it, but I know that I've chatted to you before, that they're rushing to get the badge of AI. Over the last 6 months to a year, what has been your experience of that? Are you seeing that? Are you seeing businesses rush to get the badge, and perhaps not really necessarily understanding why, or and asking, do we need the badge?
Yeah, yeah, it's been a really interesting year or so, in particular, as you say. I'll just I'll just go back a step. So I, like you, have started writing quite a lot on LinkedIn.
Mm.
I've started less than a year ago, and I was trying to write vaguely accessible, vaguely technical stuff for an audience of people, either people like me and you, um, or people who'd like to hire me as a consultant. And I was writing about all kinds of things, but every time I went and looked at my feed, someone was talking about AI. And initially, I kind of semi ignored it, to be honest, because I've been hearing this. As I said, it's been picking up since about 2015, and and I know what's going on with AI. I understand a lot, but especially over the last year or so. Um, Actually, there's two effects if we talk about LinkedIn for a moment. One is the amount of obviously or probably AI generated content is so high that it's hard to know if you're engaging with humans anymore.
Mm.
But on the other side, more generally, so much content, at least that I'm seeing, because I know there's an algorithm in there that seems to know what it wants to show me. Um, the content I'm seeing is AI is going to do this, AI is going to do that, and as you say, Stephen Klein, and I follow him as well, and um, another name I put out there as we're doing call outs is Dion Wiggins. Both of them, or Stephen is particularly active, both of them have started challenging this, as you say, mainstream narrative that AI is taking over the world, and if you don't do it now, you'll be left behind.
Mm.
Um, and it's actually it's a classic fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and fear of missing out marketing strategy. And as you say, there's lots of consultants, both self-declared AI experts and consultancies, old and new. So even the biggest ones are doing it. They're suddenly experts on understanding what you need, and will come in and assess how you can adopt AI, tell you what you need to do, and then you won't be left behind. It's wonderful. The seeds get sown. I start worrying, and then I ask my trusted advisors, and they tell me for a very reasonable price of whatever it is, I can stop you being so worried and make sure you're not missing out. Um, yeah, it's been an interesting time. It really has. I'm not enjoying it, to be honest, and I feel that I felt until recently the hype was winning, um, and so I started adding my own voice to it too. And I tend to come in with posts talking about the mathematical and computing and physical limitations, and behavioral aspects of neural networks in particular that I know about, and that are, I mean, it's not just me, they're well published, and which
Mm.
tell you about the limitations in the real world and in our real universe. And it still surprises me, Phil. I know we kind of got to know each other on LinkedIn, not about this, but it surprises me the amount of anger that me posting for example, actually AI capabilities can't grow infinitely and forever. How
Mm.
much anger that kind of thing generates.
Mm.
It's like I'm insulting their religious beliefs or something else, and
Yes.
it's it. It shocks me. It worries me. I have emotional reactions.
Mm. So yeah, I have to say, I've been caught up by the hype. There's a book by Salim Ismail, Exponential Organizations. The second 2.0 came out just about a year ago, I think it was. Um, because my background in tech, I've been in tech. I've been working with tech companies for almost 25 years myself. Um, Way back from the IBM days, and then um, I joined a company. Oh, I set up a UK based company that was a subset of an American company, and it was one of the early cloud, and we talked about this, Dyn DNS, which all of the CTOs out there will probably know quite a lot about, because we used to sell to them, because they used this technology to connect up to their websites from home. And I don't know why I've got these little clouds behind me. Obviously said something.
That's
AI.
amazing.
That's AI again. So yes, and at the time, I remember speaking to CTOs and talking about the cloud, and those CTOs thought I was a bit crazy then, because they said, "Cloud? What the hell are you talking about?" All they knew was servers, and here I was talking about the cloud. A number of years on, I come across this book, Exponential Organizations 1.0, and it's talking about that that history of companies that grew up around the 2010s to 2015s that were growing exponentially. And I remember I was working in an employee engagement organization, and I was consulting, I was going out into large organizations. And back then we were talking about digital transformation. And those companies were, many of them were a little bit befuddled as to what did we mean by digital transformation. And then I was coming, and there was me in employee engagement, consulting for employee engagement. And I started to talk about, well, the growth of exponential technology. And just as you've said, people thought I was crazy. And I was quoting from Thomas Friedman books. I can't remember the name of the book. I think something about, I've got it up here somewhere. But yeah, thank you
It's
for
his
being.
outsourcing book, isn't it? The one.
Yeah. No, there's that one, but there's the other one. Thank you for being late, where he talks about the speed of the exponential curve and how it's outpacing humans' ability to actually react to the change. So I guess I need to ask you then, Nick, is all that talk about exponential technology? Because I guess LLMs are smack bang in the middle of that, and the hype cycle is really almost it's the real live today's reality of that conversation. Is that so? Has it happened? Are we almost there? So and those people, they talk about the singularity. So that's Peter Diamandis and Salim Ismail and people like that. They're really obsessed by this talk about the singularity. I think they said we're not there yet, but are we, from your perspective, from a rational CTO, fractional CTO who's out there in the business space, are we close to that, or is all that talk also hype?
I like rational CTO. Actually, I might adopt that. Thank you. So we may well need a trigger warning here, because this next little bit of our discussion is going to have maths, and it's going to have maths terms. It's going to have potential abuse of maths terms, because that's, that upsets mathematicians and physicists and engineers. But also, maths terms are, I say this semi-seriously, because maths, a lot of people are scared of maths. So as soon as somebody comes along and says exponential, people who understand it, are going, yeah, right. If it's not actually exponential. And people who don't understand it are going, oh, that sounds scary, or I don't know what that means, but it must be true because it's got a maths term in it. There are other reactions too. But, right, so where are we? I think I'll start with the hype cycle, actually. Gartner have this thing called their hype cycle. It is it's a trademarked or copyrighted idea, the Gartner hype cycle, in capital letters. And it's a really powerful way of describing typical evolution of technology adoption. And it works pretty well for every technology these days. You have initial excitement. You have a build up. So there's early adoption. Then you have a build up until, well, not necessarily there's lots and lots of adoption. There is lots and lots of talk, lots of hype, hence the hype cycle. And it's got this lovely thing called the peak of unrealistic expectations, where bold claims are made like, this robot will make your tea and clean your house for you every day and you don't have to come home and do anything. And after a while, and this is because this is how our media works, it all interacts with us, and at some point we get bored or frustrated, or there's a crisis or a very negative incident of some kind. Everything falls off the cliff and you disappear down this curve into the trough of disillusion. I'm worried. I think many people are worried now that we are very much certainly peaking in our unrealistic expectations of what AI will do. AI here needs some quotes around it because we're really talking mostly about LLMs. I mean, the good news is that most technologies, if they don't turn out to be smoke and mirrors, and AI LLMs aren't, but they need some decent, strong applications. Eventually, you come out of the trough of disillusionment to the gentle slopes of sensible adoption. That's not what Gartner calls it, but I prefer that idea. So, that's the profile that most new technology adoptions have. And like I say, I think we are being very unrealistic at the moment about what we can expect AI LLMs to do. But exponential, yeah. So I've been, funnily enough, again, I've been posting on LinkedIn about the actual meaning of exponential recently, and we talked a little bit about this. So in easier to understand terms for non-mathematicians, I suppose, exponential means the growth gets faster and faster and faster. I mean, that, to try to understand that, if you start with 2, then you have 4, then you get 8, then you get 16, and it's shooting up. You get to the point where growth is almost vertical, almost infinite, never quite infinite, but it's going up very, very quickly, which is a lovely concept. And, if we're using it as a metaphor, we're not using it in its real sense, it's fine. I mean, you could say it's growing incredibly quickly, but exponentially sounds more official, doesn't it?
Mm.
And so you asked me a while back, when we talked before, you said, so is it exponential growth? And actually, my criticism is it's not growing exponentially. I actually say it's not growing exponentially forever. In most technologies, and we can probably talk about the wheel and fire and electricity here as well, there is a bit where suddenly everybody is trying to think of new things to do with the technology, and everybody's adopting it because, that's how human societies work, and that's how we transmit knowledge to each other. And actually, by the way, exponential growth is also the way pandemics and diseases work. So it's just to do with the number of people, really, not to do with technology. Yeah. So AI, LLMs, uptake, capabilities, there was definitely a bit of exponential growth. Definitely. The truth is, and this isn't me saying it as a mathematician, this is just, the universe telling us, the truth is nothing can grow forever, of course, because you run out of power. You run out of raw materials, you run out of data, or something you run out of, whatever it is. So what AI has been doing, and it's what all technologies actually do in terms of how they grow, they're kind of S-curvy. I'm probably drawing this backwards for you. There's some very slow growth, and there's a big peak of growth, which is probably exponential-ish, and then they kind of plateau again. So it's kind of an S. And like I said, the universe constrains us eventually to level off if nothing else does. So there's no arguing with there isn't infinite energy or infinite raw materials in the universe. Yeah. What that boils down to is I don't like the use of the word exponential. It sounds official and scary. It's great to talk about how AI has grown, and it's exciting that we've made all this progress. Will it continue to grow exponentially? No, it won't. And I've had a few interesting conversations recently, including in-person conversations, where I've said to people, I mean, what I've just said, yeah, it's brilliant. It won't grow exponentially. It will level off. And I've had a number of people who've been real believers react in various ways. Some of them have said, I don't agree with you. It will, and your job will be the first, and turn on their heel and disappear. And others have been respectfully, I don't agree with you because we can just keep adding stuff to make it better and better. So, I mean, the first argument, I disagree and walking off, is hard to argue with. But the second argument, right? The second argument is a proper human engineer's argument. But surely we can make that better. We can add something on. And yes, you can. Yes, you can. You can keep adding bits on to make it better and better and safer. But you can't keep the growth of capabilities going up like that. It's still going to level off. Really, for the same reasons, nothing can grow infinitely. And it's, again, essentially limited by computing power. Because the more you add, the more it costs in terms of computing, the more memory you use. Just keep going around that loop, and eventually you either run out of money or run out of cloud.
Yeah. And it's already incredibly expensive to run LLMs from what I can understand. And my understanding is that none of the big American companies are close to making any money, are they?
So, yeah. This is one of the big worries about people just throwing everything they can into adopting AI in any way possible. As you say, the big AI companies, certainly the big American AI companies, companies like OpenAI and Anthropic, have huge valuations and are not making very much in terms of revenue. They're certainly not covering their monthly costs in any way. There's a huge gap between the cloud they're using and the amount they charge people to essentially use that cloud for the computation. There's two things that could happen here, right? One is, heaven forbid, but somebody pulls a plug on those companies, and then everyone who's using them has a shrug and has to work out a different way of using their AI. I mean, slightly cynically, that might mean there's a lot fewer customer chatbots popping up to say, hi, I'm a customer chatbot. What can I do for you today? But leaving that minor irritation of my grumpy self aside, a slightly worse thing for people who've adopted AI is the companies say, it's been great, people, but I'm afraid now we've got to put the prices up just so we can cover our costs. And instead of paying your, even if you're top tier, I think it's about $200 a month for OpenAI, for instance, other providers are available. So instead of paying that, you're probably looking at, so these numbers are estimated and take them with a pinch of salt, but you could be looking at 20,000, just because the gap between, the provider's costs and what you're paying at the moment is so huge. And it's this, Phil, because you've worked in technology sales as well, haven't you? It's this thing, it's a loss leader.
Yeah.
It's the biggest loss leader in history, potentially.
Yes, completely. Okay, so how about if we switch into the kind of the practical aspects of this? You mentioned LLMs and the limitations of LLMs. So how about if we try to get so there's the fear and the risk, what you've just said about okay, we're using a loss leader and potentially we're going to be betting an aspect of our business on these LLMs always being set at the price they are today. And unless these big companies start making much more money, there's a very good chance that that's going to happen. Let's put that to one side and let's assume that, oh no, that's all going to be fine. Somehow or other, their business models are going to adapt and they're going to be making money. So let's put that to one side because, that's another argument. And let's get into the actual practical applications of AI LLMs or any other AI application. I mean, I had on the podcast just last week a chap who he's a consultant within the supply chain space, and he uses AI to basically report on what's happening in the supply chain. But as we got into the conversation, what I realized was that unless you had ERP systems in place with clean data, and clear business processes that you could actually see and adopt, you couldn't really do that much with AI. It seemed to me, over and above what we used to do way back in the day when we had data warehouses. And I think you and I talked about ETL, when you're extracting data and having to load it into other systems so that you could analyze it. And you were talking about fuzzy logic and all that kind of stuff. So if I can bring myself back to the question, what are the real practical? Clearly, we know that ChatGPT is out there, and we're now also hearing about companies that we have no code applications. So what are the real practical applications that business owners, from your perspective, should be looking at and thinking about?
This is, of course, I was going to say $64,000 question, but this is the $100 billion question, actually.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And I'd just take a moment, Phil, to reiterate what you were saying about data, by the way. Data, for most applications of AI, and you're right to not just concentrate on LLMs, there's lots of other technologies which are AI, and some of them have been around for 70 years, believe it or not. Some of them predate digital computers, at least theoretically. But all of them, above all, need data to operate with. Many of them need data to analyze or learn from, but all of them need data. And I will come back to your question, but I did a talk at Royal Holloway, University of London, last month to some computer science students, talking about the effect of Gen AI on their future careers. And my biggest conclusion was that rather than getting rid of jobs, very many jobs, certainly in computing, there will be a huge increase in demand for data people, data scientists, so people who, do the analysis, but especially overwhelmingly data engineers, the people who actually get the data and turn it into something usable, accessible, and sensible. So sidebar, yeah, data is absolutely the lifeblood of anything you want to do with AI. And that, for me, is the starting point about practical applications of AI. The hint should be in there. If you're doing something, if you're thinking of doing something with AI, you've got to ask yourself two fundamental questions. The first one is, do I have any data to work with? And second, do I have access to the data cheaply? Because plenty of people have great ideas to do things with AI, and then they find the data is behind very expensive paywalls, and that rather makes the application probably more difficult. So, those are the precursors. Got to have data, got to have clean data, got to have good quality data, got to have managed data, all kinds of stuff about data. But stepping forward rather into the boardrooms of companies in the UK here and around the world, especially the smaller and medium-sized companies. There's a lot of pressure in boardrooms. How do we adopt AI is a typical question. What is our best use of AI? And honestly, there is no one answer. I mean, the applications of particularly LLMs at the moment. Well, let's make a quick list. So chatbots, I've already talked about chatbots. And they can be very useful as chatbots for searching big knowledge bases. But they work better internally, actually, as it turns out, because overwhelming research on customer customer satisfaction and customer retention shows us again and again that customers really don't like AI chatbots to deal with. They prefer humans. So interesting, number one. Interesting idea, number two. There's been a lot of focus, especially on technology and software jobs. And a lot of people declaring very gleefully, your well-paid software engineering jobs are over. Back in March, Dario Amodei, who's the CEO of Anthropic, was saying all software will be written by AI within the year. So where are we now? May 2025. It's 10 months. That's it. That's all the time you've got. Pay off your mortgage and start saving, because it's all over. Probably not, in my view. But there's been another big application getting serious. Another big application has been trying to produce code, trying to do programming with AI. And it turns out it's a pretty good productivity tool, for instance, for a lot of developers. I go to CTO forums pretty regularly. At the most recent one I was at, talking to someone in a fantastically interesting business, actually human composting business. Probably need to do another discussion about that at another time. But he told me he was getting slightly niche. He told me he was getting about 10% productivity gains measured in various ways, and that's a good thing, But it's 10% productivity gains, and other people report 20, 25%. Other people report 2%. Those kind of productivity gains are not replacing jobs, and they require skill to use them. They require experience to use them. And above all, you don't want to go and just put something AI has generated live on the internet unless you want to get hacked to pieces within the hour, or certainly within the day. Give them a chance. There are other applications for LLMs at the moment in the pipeline, and of course, for their cousins, GANs, generative adaptive networks. They're the ones that do music and videos and images. So they all broadly have applications which are similar. They're kind of doing things that humans do already, mostly quite well. Somewhat disenfranchising or cutting out people who've done them in the past, certainly for the more artistic and musical things. Sorry, I don't mean music isn't artistic, for the visual and musical art things. But I end up asking myself, A, how ethical and how useful to society is that, and the future is that? And B, where are the groundbreaking applications, that the things are actually going to make society better or move us on to the next stage of human civilization, for goodness sake? Where are those applications? At this point, someone at home is probably shouting at the screen, yeah, but it's going to happen. You just have to believe.
Yeah.
And that kind of proves my point. I've been a believer for 30 odd years.
So yeah, I guess what you're saying is you've believed in LLMs, and you were there when nobody knew anything about it. You were really excited about it back then. And yet here you are saying, hang on, let's not get carried away. But let's go back to that question a little bit, because this whole area, we can go off in so many different tangents and sidelines that we could probably have 10 different podcasts about this. But if we go back to if we're thinking about the audience that we both speak to, founders, business owners, chief execs, who are being asked the question or asking themselves the question, oh my God, I've got to get on the AI train. Given that question, and I think you've already said, well, it kind of depends. If we were kind of to dig into that a little bit more, what conversation would we be having? Let's say I'm not a founder. Let's say I'm a chief exec of a 10 to 15 million company. It's pretty much people-based. We've got an established customer base. Let's say we're in the what should we say? Let's make it a little bit more difficult. Not the media space, but let's say we actually produce things. Yeah, we actually produce physical things that come out of that are machine based, for example. I know there's not that many of those companies in the UK now, but what should that chief exec be thinking? Or should it be just what you said? Well, would your advice be, let's think about the data first? Let's start there. Where would you start that person who asked that big broad question, but he's got a little bit of terror in his voice that he knows he needs to do something. He knows he needs to go back to the board and say, "Oh yeah, great guys, I've got started. I'm about to apply the AI badge." What would you say to him or her? Sorry.
No, absolutely. Yeah. So I've got a 3-step approach, actually, Phil, that I take. Before I reveal my secret 3-step approach, which
Yes.
won't surprise anybody, hopefully, I just want to say, despite what I was saying about applications of AI, there are applications of AI that are very valuable for business, and they can be discovered and they can be adapted. And I'll get into that, but there are plenty out there already, and that's our into this method. So don't take what I've said about the hype cycle or looking for applications of LLMs to say it's not possible. It is very possible, but you need to do it for your sanity and health. You need to take an approach like this. So most important, I'm going to say to the CEO, and we're going to be in a context where we're not drinking caffeinated drinks. We're going to take a breath. We're going to take a breath, because the most important thing for your business is not to react in fear or with haste, because we're rarely going to make the best decisions if we react like that. And to help that taking a breath moment, I'm going to talk about AI and electricity. And I say to you, CEO, I know you keep telling me we've got to understand what we can do with AI. We've got to understand how to adopt it. But let's just swap the words or the phrase AI, artificial intelligence, for electricity. If you start telling me you've got to understand what to do with electricity and you've got to understand how to adopt it, I'm going to be looking at you strangely, because of course it's everywhere. And the best way, I think, to start having a perspective on AI technologies, there's an S on the end of that, is they will, and spoiler, they already are in many ways, really diffuse through organizations already. It's just that most people don't recognize it anymore because they've become so normal. And for the newer wave, LLMs, GANs, they will also embed themselves all over the place. But it won't suddenly be AI running everything. The Matrix is not coming. The robots are not taking over. So we've had our little moment where we've calmed down. We've had a gong bath or something. So my my next step is to do some education, and I'll sit down with either the board or the C-suite, or the board and the C-suite, the leadership, and important thinkers in the business, and literally just spend half a morning or a morning talking about AI, what the AI technologies are, and there's a whole range of them, especially because we're talking about manufacturing. I'll come back to this. But visual processing in particular, is mostly AI based. The effective stuff, the stuff that does clever things, and I'm just going to pause for a minute. That's got it. Visual processing is hugely AI augmented in industrial settings, and I'll talk a bit more about that. And it has been for many years. So it's a bit of AI that's been around for ages, and you're using it already, CEO. You probably just didn't think of it as AI. So the next thing, as I said, we learn about AI, the technologies there, and the things the technologies can do, the properties they have. And by properties, I mean things like decision support, prediction, pattern recognition in particular, really clever unsupervised identification of patterns and clusters, things like that. Obviously, language capabilities, we're not going to leave that out, and a whole host of other things. I've got a big matrix that I've constructed over the years of technologies versus capabilities, and it changes constantly. But there's a lot of things we can talk about in 2 or 3 or 4 hours, to the point where people can then understand, so we've got these things we need to do with our business. That's where we could apply them. Great. No longer surprising, no longer scary. I'll probably spend 10 minutes of that session also saying you do not have to adopt in the next 6 months or be left behind. That's not really true. And we'll look at a couple of actual research statistics just to calm people down. The third step, though, is where the data hits the road. Remember, I was going to come back to data.
Yeah.
The third step is not to just find AI use cases. Not use cases. Not to go out prototyping AI and see if it fits, the throwing the spaghetti at the wall approach. The right approach is to actually take a good look at the data your business is producing. And ironically, we'll probably use some machine learning and AI techniques to do that. Many businesses, especially manufacturing businesses, are probably doing that in the UK and elsewhere, especially elsewhere already. But whether the data's there already, whether we have to do some more work on the data, we need to go off and identify opportunities for improvement or problems in the business, and then take a step back and think about technology enabled or even technology driven ways of fixing them. But, to put that in context, take a breath, understand the properties of AI's actually broad set of technologies, and then do some work to understand what the business really needs. Doesn't that sound, I'm not selling it to you, Phil, but doesn't that sound like probably the better way of approaching things, rather than running into the building screaming and then madly trying to set up AI prototypes all over the place?
100%. In fact, it sounds like just good business strategy, to be honest. And we had that conversation as well, didn't we? That how often over the decades in business, and I guess ever since the Industrial Revolution, have businesses been sold the need for a technology change without actually going through the hard, boring work of who are we as a business, where do we sit in the marketplace, and what do we need to solve the problems that we've got right now, and what are the opportunities that we've got based on where we are right now in order to steal a march on our competition or to do something different. And I guess that really simple 3-point formula, if we took out the AI education bit, but that could be any education about any part of business that the CEO is maybe a little bit unsure about. And it just so happens that we're talking about AI now, but it could be any digital technology, couldn't it? And that sounds
Absolutely.
Yeah, that sounds like a very practical way of thinking about how to do business. And yet, I guess the problem is the fear is already deep seated, and the to use another metaphor, there's already the chief exec is already sitting on a hot seat and feels that he or she has to do something about that. But that's what it sounds like. Is that that's your mainstream approach to when you go into an engagement, an opportunity to deploy your fractional CTO skills? Is that your system, as it were?
That's my simple approach, and that's what I talk to people about. And so I'm going to go back on the factory floor in a minute with you. Actually, the reaction sometimes is, yeah, that seems sensible. Let's have this. Let's learn a bit more about the properties if we need to. To be fair, some firms actually know what they're doing and just need to find the initiatives, find the improvement opportunities they can work with to see what works. But some firms, as you kind of implied, might be the case. Some firms don't feel comfortable after that initial meeting, and so, as I said, a virtual walk around the factory floor with the CEO. So we're in the manufacturing industry, as you said. Let's go and have a look at your robotics over there, where you're building the widgets and packaging them. They've got, apart from the fact that you're using robots, which were a technology they actually started in the 70s, big time, and they were going to take away factory workers' jobs. I don't know if you remember that, when we
Yeah.
were both very young. It
Yes.
turns out they didn't.
Yes.
Um, but hey, um, looking at the robots, these days, they've got advanced visual processing systems on, little cameras, multiple angles, and you've got a screen over here that's identifying the defects and kicking them out into the defects bin. And CEO, you know how that's being done, do you? Oh, yeah, it's visual processing. Yes, that's AI. That is AI, and that's been there for 10 or 15 years. So you have already successfully adopted AI, and it's come along evolutionarily. There'll be other things going on in the business as well. They've probably got decision support in some way or other that's using logic and knowledge based systems or rule based systems. Typically, they sit in ERPs. You have adopted AI in a number of places in your business already. What we're looking for is another opportunity. There is a difference, because your current opportunities, you don't know them. We've got to dig them up, unless unless we're lucky enough to come into a business that said, oh, we've already identified the opportunities, let's just implement them. Well, we're kind of ignoring that one because they're too clever by half. The difference between the evolutionary adoption with the vision on robots and decision support and stuff and LLMs now, and the big noise about that, is nobody's really sure what to do with them. So we are looking for places to fit them in. Whereas it was quite logical, wasn't it? If you're doing things with a robot, to have the robot able to see what it was manipulating and identifying defects.
Okay, so that sounds like you, and that it's funny. I hadn't realized that, but that makes complete sense. Visual processing in a factory floor is already AI. So that's quite a that's quite a realization for me. And I guess I think you've hinted at, there's lots of other applications like that where AI is already in place. And the whole going back to the data thing, the data game and machine learning and the early versions of machine learning have been around for a heck of a long time. So are
Oh
we?
yeah, 1950s probably is the birth of machine learning, just for
Wow,
another date to throw in.
wow. So are we saying then that all of the hype, all the mainstream hype around AI, LLMs, or sorry, all the big hype around AI, is it mainly around the large language models, or is there another, so the whole no code application, is that different from the LLMs? And if so, how?
So we're actually probably in the second generation of no code, low code stuff. The previous generation, which started, thinking back, probably late noughties, early teens of the 2000s, that was more rule based. And in actual fact, there were previous generations, but they weren't thought of as low code or no code. They were just thought of as code generators. So I remember in 2000, sitting on a trading floor in a bank, developing a system with drag and drop components, and it generated, terrible code in the background, but it worked because it's what a lot of people call boilerplate. You just need to change the names of a few bits and pieces, and if you've got a button or a slider, it always does the same thing, just connects in different ways.
So was that back in the days
The
of
newer
so was that back in the days of object oriented development? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah,
Right. Okay.
absolutely. We're talking, that kind of stuff. Take a step back. Productivity tools for developers have been around essentially, not forever, because at some point people were doing things with ones and zeros and switches on the front of big washing machine type things. But, since the late 80s and early 90s, there have been things like autocomplete and right click on your mouse to give you options of what to autocomplete, and then pasting in blocks of boilerplate and intelligent suggestions based on rules. So a different generation of AI, rule-based, knowledge-based systems, not LLMs. But roll forward, I put a bit of blah, blah, blah in that answer. The current generation of no-code stuff is almost entirely based on LLMs. So the best performing stuff has lots of rules around it, lots of guardrails and guidelines as well. But it's using LLMs much more because LLMs have been trained essentially on the entire internet and allegedly lots of other questionably sourced materials, which means they've essentially been trained on the entire sum of human knowledge that's available publicly, and that includes a lot of programs and programming courses and things like that. By the way, that includes lots of intentional mistakes, which is a clue to some of the things that go wrong. It also includes, I don't know if you realize this, I'm sure you do, Phil. I'm sure most people do. Every website you look at is actually code that gets downloaded into your browser and rendered into something easy to use and pretty. When you've trained on the entire internet, you've trained on all the publicly facing code on every website of the internet as well. So that's quite a large training set.
Okay.
And so LLMs, they've learned how people build lots of programs. They've learned how people build the web, and you can get a very convincing statistical output of a program based on the input prompt. That's brilliant. And as I say, to your original question, yes, most no code stuff is essentially LLM driven with extra rules and guidelines, like I say, but that's where it's coming from. But there are problems with that, of course. They're great productivity tools. And in particular, I would 100%, well, possibly 99%, recommend them for fast prototyping these days. It's so good to be able to prototype your idea and then throw it away when that looks rubbish and then have another go and another go. You will spend quite a lot of money on your tokens, but it's still cheaper than employing lots of people to build stuff to throw away. It's a great use. The problems emerge when you start thinking you can trust AI code with no human intervention to actually just start working there in production on the internet. I said this earlier to you, but you put something like that live. I actually talk about this quite a lot. There's really 4 factors you need to care about. There's the scalability of something that's written by AI. So how do you work with more people? There's the reliability. How often does it crash? There's its flexibility as well. How do you send it in different directions? If it's been written by AI rather than software engineers who thought that they may add different features and go in different directions as the business developed. But the overriding concern, and the only one really you need to care about, is security. And I say this a lot of the time because I've done cybersecurity work myself in the past. But this is the rule: if you haven't absolutely certified it as secure as it can be, it's not secure.
Mm.
So if no human has tested it, if it's not been written for security, if it's not been built with zero trust architectures and all kinds of brilliant stuff to make us more secure, it's not secure. The short version is I do this with no code. I tell AI I want to build something. I put it on the internet, and half an hour later, I've got hackers crawling all over the place, and I don't own anything myself anymore.
Mm. That's interesting.
That sounds quite negative, doesn't it? I can't really see any positive upside.
No, but apart from the prototyping, that makes a heck of a lot of sense. If you want to quickly prototype a variety of ideas and then quickly test them, and you're not worried about the security of those applications, that sounds fantastic. And when we think about innovating, and we do need to innovate, what can be better than using that application to come up with new ideas and test them quickly, and if they work, great. And then you're saying at that point, then we need to start handing over to the humans. But I guess there must be people in the audience who'll be thinking, yeah, but as time goes on, AI will develop and it will be able to operate like humans when it comes to checking on the security and the avoiding it being hacked and all that kind of stuff. And there must be people saying, well, we're close to that now, for example.
I've got a two-part response to that because I've been asked exactly that question. So I've already answered it, not to you,
Mm-hmm.
but I mean, there's two parts to that. You remember I was saying that capabilities always plateau, and we can, in theory, keep adding on capabilities after capabilities and get things more human-like, but they cost more and more money and more power and more compute time. And actually, in the end, you're either writing rules and rules and rules and rules and rules, and when rules are used, things get inflexible. And by the way, that is what firms like data annotation are doing for $20 an hour or more. They're getting people to constantly retrain and add in rules for chatbots, and also capture. If you ever get those little grids of pictures that you've got to pick out all the antelopes or the zebra crossings or whatever,
terrible.
You're actually training AI for them free. But whatever it is, there's only so many rules and only so much training you can do. You've essentially used all the training data. You can keep on generating training data by getting humans to train little things, but you're no longer training something to program. You're training something to do something in an exact way. Have a semicolon here, not here, or use this function with 2 arguments, not 3 arguments, or things like that. The second part of my answer, I've completely forgotten because I got so excited about capture and antelopes and zebra crossings. Remind me of the question again. I'll come to part 2.
So I guess the question was, the hype mongers will say, "Oh yeah, okay, old guy, Nick. You were big back in the day, 35 years ago, but you probably don't realize just how fast these human-like processes are coming through to be able to take the prototyped code and make it secure."
Absolutely. So thank you, Phil. So the second part is a bit more sort of complex, but I think it starts being an economic, well, obviously running out of power and electricity and so on is also an economic consideration. But the second part is an economic consideration about humans. So I've got a bunch of software developers who already and always have in their lifetimes used productivity tools to improve the quality of their code. We should say much more fundamentally than this. If you're a software engineer, it's generally accepted that about 80% of your time is not coding. It's research, it's design, it's a bit of fiddling about and prototyping. It's getting together, getting advice, things like that. But it's not coding. It's only about 20% of your time is coding anyway. The projects when I was a software engineer, I used to partly enjoy the most and partly hate the most were what I used to call forensic programming. When I got a big bunch of code with no real documentation and somebody says, there you go, we need an update to that so we can get this new data source in a month's time. Off you go. Ah, and all you've got is code. And the people amongst us who haven't worked on huge programs, or even, I mean, we're not necessarily huge, but thousands or tens of thousands of lines of code, will say, but you're a software developer, you can just look at that and understand how it works. Yes, you can, but it's going to take a while. You don't just sit down and by some miracle of Zen programming have an understanding after sitting there cross-legged for a few minutes in your sandals. You have to sit there and work through it. Now, if AI is generating all the code, but the human has to test it for security and scalability and flexibility and so on, they've got to learn the code first. As opposed to if they were sitting there designing it and writing it themselves and building all of that stuff in. And although AI productivity tools, like I said earlier, they are definitely producing some measurable productivity gains for developers, as previous productivity tools have as well, it gets to a point where the payoff between having AI write everything and a human to fix it, let's say, check it and fix it, or having the human do what they do now with incrementally improving productivity tools, the payoff is zero. Because on the one hand, I'm having to learn everything that the AI has just coughed up and then do my work on it. On the other hand, I'm using the AI to help me and I cough up my own code. Yes, so there is an element of opinion in that, but the measures of productivity, the measures of time spent on software development, not writing code and other things are fairly well supported by research. So my opinion is we will soon come to a point where it's obvious that the productivity side of things is better. There's an extra concern that a lot of technology leaders are talking about now. And I had this conversation again at the CTO forum I was at recently, a couple of weeks ago. Several more experienced, with no hair or with wrinkles and poor eyesight,
I know the feeling.
like me, and people were saying, where do we get our junior developers from if we're replacing lots of the sort of the lower level work, the less experienced level work with AI? We're going to suddenly have a skills cliff, and then what do we do? And that's a genuine big concern. There's two factors. One is, just replacing or just not hiring junior developers because we can do this with AI, in quotations, scare quotations. The other is people who would have become junior developers, like the people I was talking to at Royal Holloway recently, deciding to go off and do something else instead of becoming junior developers. And we will be shooting ourselves in the foot collectively in the future, because the future is always more technological, and we will fundamentally need people writing software. There's a famous, Escher, who draws those crazy diagrams with the staircase that goes up.
Oh yes, yes, yeah.
Moritz Escher. So he's got this. My favourite Escher picture is the one of two hands, each with a picture drawing themselves.
Yes.
And that is kind of, that's the kind of situation I'm thinking about in my mind when people say, oh yeah, but AI will just be able to do that. So AI will write AI. AI will test AI. And clearly, that's highly unlikely.
So that was the question I was about to ask you about AI testing AI. So you've explained really well how the no coding works from the the expanded code base out on the internet, and then you explained that that stuff's great for writing programs for prototyping, but there's dangers because when it comes to the scaling of those systems, the security of those systems, and the avoiding the hackability of those systems, that's when, at the moment, those applications need to be handed over to experienced developers. But would the AI hype cycle merchants not say exactly what you've just said there about the handwriting? Wouldn't they say that we're very close to AI being able to do all that security checking and and enabling the scaling? Are we saying that we're still? Are you saying that we're actually miles away from that, or that it's almost theoretically not possible for it to be done by AI?
Yeah. So the AI, the people who've been truly caught up in the AI hype do already say that. So they are already saying yes, and that's behind their argument that software engineering will be done with. AI will be doing everything within the year or within 10 months in Dario Amadei's case now. Yeah, there's a couple of things going on here. And by the way, just thinking about low code, no code stuff and AI generated code, it does turn out that they're much better at writing web apps than they are at stuff they haven't had much training data on. And a lot of things happen in the background that the code isn't available on the internet. So, anything that's not open source, and lots of stuff is not open source. So all the open source code has been used to train it as well, obviously. Yes. But anything that's not open source, they're not going to have a clue how to develop. That's a little sidebar.
Yeah, but that's quite an important sidebar.
But it's quite an important sidebar, and it does feed into what AI will be able to do. So won't be able to write anything that's never seen the code for. It can guess at it, and it will probably make it look like it, but under the surface won't be doing the same things. And the functionality as an extension, it's not just the surface, won't be the same. But there's a theoretical and a practical reason. There are theoretical and practical reasons why AI won't be doing everything. The theoretical reason, actually, I'll come back to that. The practical reason is, if we're talking about LLMs in particular, and it's LLMs that are the core of all of this. Other technologies, things like rule-based systems, even fuzzy logic, they don't have the same power as LLMs, because LLMs are the only way, with neural networks, the only way to build this enormous statistical model of human languages and programming languages and actually, music and art and everything else. Because they have this fantastic way of generalizing. Generalization is the property of neural networks above all, which enables all of this. And it's non-programmed, it's learned, which is why it seems natural and why it can mimic things really naturally. Here's the core of the problem. You stuff in too much data to a neural network, it overtrains, and it gives you more and more specific answers, which are accurate, but the generalization falls apart. So it will just give more and more rubbish answers on broader topics. So, this is the background cause behind what's called hallucination, or errors, as I prefer to call it. But that's what's causing that already. It's the statistical model just goes a bit haywire because of the noise, the lossy recall. That's what's going on. So stuffing more and more data in doesn't produce better and better performance. It eventually breaks things. So that's the neural networks reason. That's the practical reason. You can't just fill it with infinite data. The kind of the theoretical reason why AI won't be doing everything, and this is, I was talking to people about this a few days ago. Unfortunately, it's got a Latin name, but I started off, as you may remember, Phil, I started my career in maths and philosophy, and that was what led me into AI. And one of the brilliant things they teach you in philosophy courses is argument analysis, how to argue, how to construct arguments and techniques for attacking arguments. And this technique I was talking about a couple of days ago is called reductio ad absurdum. I mean, reduction to the absurd, taking things to their logically absurd conclusions. And a very simple way, ignoring the Latin, a very simple way of attacking propositions like AI will take all jobs, AI will do everything is, what's the point? Because imagine, if you will, for a second, Phil, Silicon Valley has replaced all jobs. There are a few billionaires who have all the money. The humans are essentially just starving to death or on some universal basic income, living in caves, not really doing anything. The basis of the money the billionaires are sitting on, well, the basis of the money that the billionaires are sitting on is in an active economy. Now there's only sort of 8 or 10 billionaires with all the money. Their money's not worth anything anymore. So what are they going to do with it? Eat it. And B, the AI. So you've got AI doing all the jobs, but it's AI talking to AI, ringing up and saying, can I book a room? Yes, you can have a room. Or growing crops or harvesting crops, although admittedly we might be in the utopian version of that world, we may be feeding the humans to keep them alive with AI built things.
But what would be the point?
But what would be the point? Why is AI talking to AI about AI and doing things for AI all the time? You've taken the humans entirely out of the loop. You've essentially built a little circle, round and round and round, AI to AI to AI, and it's not actually benefiting anything or doing anything for anyone anymore. There's no economic benefit for anyone in it, in a nutshell. So there you go, a neural network's reason.
Wow.
Plus what would be the point of that reason?
Yeah. Wow. That's fascinating. Okay. So we've probably taken maybe a deeper dive for many people out there listening to this. So maybe we should bring it back into the practical world. You've already mapped out, I think, what your system is. So if a chief exec or a business owner or a founder of a company is thinking, right, okay, I need to bring in somebody who really understands tech, not just AI, but understands tech. It sounds like the system that you use is this three-pronged, three-step approach. Take a breath, do some education around, so it could be AI, but it could also be tech in general. And then finally, let's look at your data, but you could expand that a little bit, I guess, by asking, let's look at your business and let's ask the question.
Exactly.
Yeah. Let's look at your business and let's ask the question, what do we need or want technology to do such that we have a more effective business going forward? It sounds like that's your three-step approach. Which is,
it is, Phil, and thank you for pulling it back up out of the. Sorry.
No, that was good because that was me who took you there, not you. You probably wouldn't have gone that deep. But I guess I'm asking these questions because they're in my mind. Because I'm listening to the hype cycle and I'm thinking, well, exactly. So if we don't need developers, then that, just as you've said, why would we send kids to university to learn computing? But then you take that on further and you ask, well, then we've got AI just doing it, and then, well, we don't really need people, do we? So hopefully that's been useful, because I know there's lots of, I have conversations with lots of business owners who say, well, Phil, where's this all going? And hopefully, I think what this deeper conversation has done has really addressed some of that scary hype. Because if it is going there, then there's really no place for humans We're just going to be the big tech bros, going from country to country, having big conversations with Saudi sheikhs. But even then, well, why? Because there's only going to be a few people on planet Earth with all the money, and what kind of world is that going to be? So bringing it back into practical application, there's your 3-step process. So, what would you say, Nick? What are the problems that business owners and founders have when it comes to that very clear 3-step process of, okay, we're thinking we need a fractional CTO, or we just need somebody who can help us with technology in general. What are the problems that those guys have in working with that really clear, really simple 3-step model?
Yeah, so that's the core question, isn't it? And at this point, some of my colleagues who do what's usually called value creation work in businesses, which is, funnily enough, taking this approach of understanding a business, being data-led and looking at ways to improve the business, increasingly through technology, but with processes and people as well. They're going to be shouting, that's just value creation work. And it is. It's the kind of thing that any company that's been invested in by private equity knows very well, in particular, but other businesses do it too. This is the kind of thing that boards want to do all the time. Certainly when they've got their eye on the ball, bring people in, and increasingly this is technology driven. It's not always about the technology function, it's about finding technology opportunities, but bring people in to help upgrade, renovate, take to the next level, whatever you want to call it, their business. So the reality is, we are talking about very sensible approaches to keeping the business current and improving the business, but necessarily with a focus on new technologies, new emerging technologies. Although I've been critical of the AI hype cycle, it's an emerging technology. There's no question it's not an emerging technology. So you've got to go out and do your due diligence on it and check where it could be used by you and your competitors. So again, don't adopt it in 6 months, you're going to be left behind. Not true. But there may be some things you can do that could keep you competitive, and maybe your competitors won't adopt in the same way. So there's differentiation and genuine competitive advantage to be had, maybe. The barriers to doing these kinds of things, the barriers are actually the ones I've come across so far, and this will change over time. Nobody really has a problem with, most people don't have a problem with take the breath part. I was just going to say nobody, but I've remembered somebody I've spoken to who said something on the lines of, well, that's just not urgent enough. This is serious. I feel your pain. I really do. I'm not joking. But if we don't do it this afternoon, if we have to wait until next week or even just tomorrow, it's not going to make a material difference. So we need to take a sensible approach. But leaving that aside, the problems that people face in just identifying technology-driven and emerging technology-driven, AI-driven advances their business can make are around the data, having the data, the right data, clean data, accessible data, and about knowing enough about those technologies, these new emerging technologies, focusing on AI, knowing enough about how to use them. And so being able to marry up the opportunities that people know about opportunities. I should say this as well. We don't just go into a boardroom, sit there in silence for a couple of weeks until the data comes in, and then people are, magically revealed with new problems they never knew about. Of course, everybody running the business knows their business inside out, but there are definitely cases, frequent cases, where data reveals new things or actually challenges and contradicts some views as well. That's not unusual at all. So let's be realistic. It's not always data. Sometimes we look at the problems people know about. But I think where I come in and where, my colleagues come in, people like me come in as well, not the only person doing this, but where I come in is the connecting business knowledge, the data and analytics capabilities that we'll build or use or find, and knowing how to apply the emerging technologies, especially AI, to the potential opportunities and the problems that emerge from actually, understanding the problems and maybe doing some analytics as well. It's the marrying up of the solutions to the problems. I've used this golden hammer pattern for a long time. You've probably come across the idea of architectural patterns in software design. It's a bit technical, but people talk about things like singletons. They've got funny names. Doesn't really matter. But these are ways of thinking that can be applied very simply to a whole load of problems, and they make software development easier to understand and explain. Funnily enough, another productivity tool, and it's all in books. So you also have anti-patterns, things that you shouldn't do. And my favorite anti-pattern is called the golden hammer. And the anti-pattern is you only have one tool and it's a hammer, and therefore all problems are nails. So you go around hitting everything until obviously the problem goes away. Turns out though that some of the problems are screws. Some of the problems are bolts. Some of the problems maybe are eggs. Not all of them are by any stretch are nails, and things go badly wrong. That really, really badly stretched metaphor is the way I'm seeing LLMs and AI being talked of, Gen AI being talked about at the moment. It's, people think we must apply it to everything. It's the hammer. So it's actually a solution in search of problems. And putting it another way, that's what I'm doing. That's what I'm helping businesses with. You start, instead of being AI first, you actually want to be problem or opportunity first. Don't turn up with a tool and try and apply it to things. Turn up with problems and opportunities and just ideas, and then find the right tool. So I'll find them the right tool. I'll help them identify the problems, the opportunities, the ideas, and find them the right tools to capitalize and fix.
Well, that's very practical. That makes a heck of a lot of sense. Let me ask you one other question about the business owner, chief exec, or founder. What about the mindset of that individual? Now, I know mindset is a word that quite often business people recoil against, but the reason I use that word is you and I both have come across business owners who have opinions about a whole bunch of technologies, and we've been talking about that today. But how often do you come up against businesses where the problem that they have is the business owner, the founder, is a little bit close-minded about what's possible for fixing either the problems or moving towards an opportunistic space? Does that make sense? The question, first of all.
It does. It does. And it's, in many ways, it's my favorite question, because this is the challenge. This is the best challenge for a consultant, to actually not just show something, but to change somebody's mind about it. But it's a pretty uncomfortable situation to be in, having been in it on a number of occasions, and actually a couple of times this year in various ways. See, fundamentally, if you are paying me, Phil, for my ideas and opinions, my advice, they're not just opinions, are they? Well, you're hoping for my fee that you're getting something with bit of background, a bit of education, a bit of experience behind it. But you're paying me for my honest, candid advice, my expert opinion. And if my expert opinion is do this, that, and the other, and you go, well, I think that's not the right approach. I don't know why I've just adopted a mock Yorkshire accent. Apologies. It's not meant to. It's too late now.
Yes.
Not meant to offend. I'm just adopting another personality. But if you cross your arms and say that's not the right approach, you are entitled to your opinion. But if it is only an opinion, then I'm going to thank you for my fees, gently remind you that you did ask me for my opinion, and we part on very good terms. My experience, there will be other ways of doing this that are much better, I'm sure. But my experience is, as long as you can clearly disagree in an amicable way, the phone rings again in a couple of days or a couple of weeks, and someone is on the other end of it going, I had a word with the other people, and it turns out that I was probably a bit hasty. We actually asked you for your opinion, and you've given it, and we've asked some other people, and they've kind of said the same. Would you like to come back? Yeah. I mean, that I'm not always right, but I'll try not to give an opinion if I feel I'm on shaky ground. And I mean, one of the things I say somewhere on my personal, my business website is if I can't solve your problem for you, I can't, support your request, I will find someone else who can. So in those situations, I have found people with an alternate view or an alternate approach for them to talk to as well, just so they can hear another side of the argument. I think it's always helpful. It's interesting. When I used to be a consultant in a Big Four consultancy, and you probably know, because I think you've done consulting as well, Phil, there's all kinds of rules and regulations about independence. And one of the most important things about independence is not acting as management. So even if you're there talking to the board, you can't actually tell them what to do. You're there for advice, and then they get to make the decision. And although I don't have those same formal rules as an independent consultant, I still try to be intellectually independent. I still try to give them the best advice. But in the end, again, it's you as the business owner or the CEO or as the board, whoever it is, that's making the decision. And I'll try and persuade you if I think you're making the wrong decision, but you're making the decision. So that's it. I've tried my best. We've disagreed amicably. I've given you someone else to talk to, maybe. Hopefully you've rung up and said, you know what, we think yours was the better idea. Come and talk about it a bit more. But if you decide you need to replace all your software engineers with a couple of computers running LLMs,
yeah, best of luck.
Good luck. And maybe we'll talk in a few months. Yeah. I don't know, but if not, yes. It's been great working with you, and best of luck.
Yeah, and I hope your business is still around. Yeah, definitely. Okay, that's fabulous. So Nick, I'm kind of wondering, we've gone on quite a tour, I think. We probably didn't dive into your history as much as I thought we would, because I think we dove in quite deeply into some of the concepts around AI and what it can and can't do. Is there anything that you think or you feel that we've maybe missed that we haven't covered in the last 90 minutes or so?
The origin story, Phil, thank you. Yeah, that's really interesting. Did I tell you about the time I was bitten by the radioactive spider? Maybe we can put that in.
Wow.
That was when I developed my powers to swing between buildings on webs. Yeah, I mean, seriously. I think so. I worry about having a child I worry more generally about the future direction of society and upcoming generations' place in the society as it changes faster and faster. I think the thing I take away from the thing I take away from the way I got to where I am now is I never sat there and planned, and by the time I'm this age, I'll be a fractional CTO. Back when I was 18, I didn't have a clue. I went and followed things I enjoyed. So, as I said, I went off and did maths and philosophy because I actually took a year out before going to university, which was an unusual thing in my generation. And initially, I was going to go and do maths, just maths, but I spent a lot of the year traveling and reading like crazy, and I read some philosophy books. And during that year off, I changed, reapplied to university, and went and did maths and philosophy instead. The interest originally, I wanted to be an author and a journalist, but by the time I'd done lots of maths and been fortunate to go and spend 4 or 5 months in California working in Silicon Valley, way back on what was called BUNAC. I think the scheme still exists for students.
I remember it. Yeah, I remember it.
I'd come back and it had really changed my perspective. Oh, it was a great thing, just fantastic. And I was incredibly privileged to be able to go and work in Silicon Valley because a lot of my mates went and we had equally brilliant times. But I was working in Silicon Valley and they were working in an amazing place, doing all kinds of cutting edge things with electron microscopes and crazy stuff. And more people worked in burger bars or whatever. Doesn't really matter. I was privileged. But that changed my outlook, and I realized that technology and especially computing would be the way forward. So I came back, final year of my course, did some computer science courses, and started applying to do either an MSc or a PhD in AI, because I was reading about it all the time and thinking this is fascinating, and these neural network things they could do something. Accidentally, through a personal connection, found out about the research group at Imperial College, asked for a chat with my supervisor there, Professor Igor Alexander, who is still around, although happily he's taking it easy these days. And yeah, got accepted into the research group, got a grant because in those days everything was paid for, and just spent years doing crazy stuff. During that time, met my now ex-wife to be, sadly, who lived in Italy and still lives in Italy. Ended up moving to Italy and then commuting to Italy backwards and forwards for 30 years, working in investment banking technology, leading technology in a huge Fortune 500 software house, doing consulting, traveling all over the world, working, and here I am now. And the first really definite positive career decisions I made were about 2023. Believe it or not, I decided I would go on the excellent CTO program at Berkeley, where I'm just finishing up. So shout out to the CTO program at Berkeley. And also, I wanted to go freelance as a fractional CTO and work with startups and do value creation in growing companies, which is what I'm doing now. And that was literally the first very, very clear, very, very active set of career decisions I think I took.
Wow.
So if anyone can take anything away from that, is it's never too late. It's never too late to actually work out what you want to do. And if by the age of 18 or 21, you're sitting there thinking, my career is over, it hasn't actually started. Even now, even with the change, the currently increasing change of society and work, especially as it is.
So that's a fascinating little summary of your history, and that the majority of that time you're saying that you were just really going from opportunity to opportunity based on what you were interested and fascinated by. And it wasn't until like 2 or 3 years ago that you really made the decision about, okay, I'm going to have to knuckle down now and and plan my actual future. So I think that's a great piece of advice for, as you say, all of those young people out there, that might be listening to this thinking, "Oh my God, it's all over because AI is going to do everything." Um,
Yeah.
that's
Oh,
clearly
yeah.
that's clearly not the case, based on this conversation. Um, so I think all that remains for me, Nick, is just to ask how do business owners, chief execs, or heads of technology get hold of you? What's the best way to get hold of you? And what you've mentioned something about? Have you written a book, or are you in the process of writing a book?
At the moment, and thanks for the opportunity to publicise myself, Phil. I appreciate that. Yeah, at the moment, I'm focusing more on writing stuff on LinkedIn. I do tend to try to strike a balance between genuinely technical, useful, and business useful subjects, and keep it social media friendly, so it's very bite sized. I've written a few. I've written a few mini book sized things over the last year or so. For instance, one of my interest areas is around the best way of managing cloud for your business. And I've got a 25 pager on that and a few other things. But I hang out mostly on LinkedIn when I'm not working with clients and talking to wonderful people like Phil. And that's where there are many posts by me. And of course, LinkedIn's got my details. I do offer a free call with people if they've got specific things to talk about. So always happy to just help people answer some of their questions and get some clarity about any business and technology problems they have. But yes, LinkedIn is the place I'm most active in terms of sending out to the world my thoughts and opinions, and hopefully a few helpful hints and tips here and there.
That's fantastic. So, just for those people who might just be listening to this, let me make sure that we've got the spelling of your name correct. It's Nick Sales, and that's Sales. Yeah.
As in January, that's
Yes.
right. As in January sales, that's it.
Cheap and cheerful, Nick Sales. Not at all, Nick. This has been Nick. This has been fascinating. I've thoroughly enjoyed this, and I have to admit, I think I've probably been a little bit indulgent in my time with you, because even though I'm much more on the sales and like in the business strategy side of things, I've got such a long history in working in tech that whenever I get the opportunity to dive a little bit deeper, not to the kind of depth that you guys go to, but I love speaking to people in tech, because I do really believe that hand in hand with people, my whole philosophy is the fusion of people and tech should, and if we bring in leadership as well, good leadership, those three platforms should allow us to build good, strong, profitable businesses that are beneficial for humanity. And that's why I love having conversations with people like you, because to actually be able to take technology and use it in a practical, beneficial way, I think is so important for our communities and for the future of society. So thank you so much, Nick, for your time, for the work that you do, and I hope that many people listening to this will contact you, because I know that you do some amazing work. So thank you so much, Nick.
Thank you, Phil. I was so excited to come and talk to you after our discussions before, because they've all been such fun, and it's turned out to have been another blast. So thank you so much. It's been awesome.
You're absolutely welcome. Well, thank you very much, Nick. And I hope to have you back, because clearly there'll be another round of hype in the future. And maybe we need to get you back to be the destroyer of the hype, and to get people back on a level playing field. So I hope you will come back, Nick. And thank you so much.
Looking forward to it, Phil. Thanks a lot.